You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 35.
Metaxas, his aides, Shawkat, Burnmaster, and his companions walked briskly through a large concrete corridor that had long black pipes bolted to the ceiling in both directions. There were red and yellow signs painted on various walls, written in Yeshan, that Laheeti suspected said things like hazard and danger. Some of the yetis who walked past them were wearing hard hats and safety glasses. The scientist, a wizened old yeti with failing eyesight who squinted at them, stopped at a pair of closed steel doors. This place was locked up tighter than a bank vault. "This is as far as I can take you," he explained. "From here on, it's a highly restricted area, especially seeing as you've got some non-citizens in the group." Metaxas stared at the scientist. "Then they've just been given the necessary security clearance by me," he declared. "So open the doors, I want to see these jetpacks for myself." Grumbling, the scientist slid his ID card through the slot next to the door. The light above the slot turned green and the steel doors slid open. As the group filed past, the scientist asked one of the aides, "Is he allowed to do that?" The aide shrugged and said, "He just did." He saw the look of concern on the scientist's face. "Don't worry if these jetpacks are half as good as Shawkat said they are. The council will probably give you a medal or something." The scientist's squinty face became more pinched. "I told you before, they're not jetpacks," he muttered. When everybody had moved through the open doorway, the scientist stepped inside and slapped his palm against a red button, causing the steel doors to rapidly shut. Looking around, he saw that the group was staring wide-eyed at their surroundings. They were standing in a large auditorium with gray concrete walls and a high, domed ceiling. To Burnmaster, it felt as large as an aircraft hangar, and like the corridors that had brought him to this place, had a distinctly military feel to it. In the middle were 4 columns stretching from floor to ceiling, each with a tangle of multicolored cables snaking from the sides of the column to a propulsion unit. There were 4 units, identical in design and color. The 14-year-olds took one look at them and knew that they were the jetpacks Shawkat had talked about. "Awesome," breathed Laheeti. "Yetis and jetpacks," said Twig. "Now I know I must be dreaming. This is too cool to be real." Zaw, standing beside him, held up a clawed finger and thumb. "You want me to pinch you to help you wake up," he scoffed. Twig shook his head quickly. Burnmaster walked a circle around one of the jetpacks, hands on hips, examining it from all sides. It was a sophisticated-looking piece of equipment with a blue and white color scheme and smooth aerodynamic contours. It was roughly rectangular in shape, with heavy-duty harness straps to enable a pilot to wear the unit on his or her back. Burnmaster was reminded of the white jetpacks worn by American astronauts in space, except for one significant difference. These jetpacks had twin rotors mounted on both sides of the backpack unit, each inside a vectoring nacelle. The scientist was right. It wasn't a jetpack, it was more like a twin-rotor helicopter pack. Burnmaster had no idea if it could fly, but it certainly looked like the business. It was difficult to estimate how much it weighed, but judging from its size, it couldn't be light. Probably couldn't be operated by a single human without assistance. That made sense because it was, after all, designed by yetis for yetis. The tangle of cables leading from the column to the unit appeared to serve a variety of purposes, some diagnostic, some to supply power. An LCD screen on the side of the unit displayed technical information. Laheeti stood beside Burnmaster. "I never thought I'd ever see a real jetpack," he remarked. "Bet you never thought you'd see a yeti either," muttered the scientist, "but here you are, and for the record, they're not jetpacks. Do you see any jets sticking out of them?" He shook his head in frustration. "What are they teaching you kids in human schools these days?" Laheeti scratched the back of his head. "Okay, so what are they called?" he asked. "Each one is a compact low/high-altitude airwalk system," explained the scientist, "which is a bit of a mouthful, so we use the acronym CLAAWS and call them CLOS for short." Laheeti nodded and said, "Got it." Burnmaster was impressed. "Can they really fly?" he asked. "Of course they can fly," snapped the scientist. "Do you think they're props for some Hollywood movie? Each one is capable of carrying 300 kilograms to an altitude of almost 9,000 meters. That means they'll take you to the summit of Everest and back, top speed of 150 kilometers per hour. Fully powered up, they've got enough juice to keep flying for 48 hours straight." "48 hours," repeated Burnmaster skeptically. "What's the power source?" "Batteries," replied the scientist. Burnmaster frowned. "What kind of batteries?" he queried. The top secret kind, the scientist answered coldly, then moved the discussion along. They're completely experimental, not in production on any level. They've been specifically designed for use by Yeti rescue teams to give the teams a greater range of operations in the mountains. That way we can save more dopey humans who get themselves into trouble. Ouch, muttered Twig, I guess we had that one coming. Yes, we apologize for being dopey, added Laheeti. Not to worry, kid, the scientist said. It's probably the fault of the adults who brought you to the Himalayas. What about radar? Asked Burnmaster. It would sure mess up your party if the Nepalese Air Force detected you flying around. The cloths are all invisible to radar, the scientist explained. Burnmaster found this difficult to believe. You mean, completely invisible? He asked. What part of invisible didn't you understand? The scientist replied. Metaxas interrupted. I count 4 claws, is that all you've got? He asked. The scientist shook his head. These are Generation 2s, or Gen 2s for short, he said. We've got 3 more Gen 1s as well. What's the difference? Metaxas asked. The Gen 2s are better, lighter, more stable, better hovering capability, the scientist explained, but they're still too noisy. He shrugged and added, we're working on that. It's one of the limitations of the ducted rotor blade design. Metaxas nodded. How many are flight ready? He asked. All of the Gen 2s and 2 of the Gen 1s, replied the scientist. He laughed half-heartedly and quickly added, you can't actually take any of them, of course. They're all prototypes, one of a kind, you understand. All 7 of them are one of a kind? Burnmaster asked. That's right, the scientist said defensively. Burnmaster narrowed his eyes. So they are 7 of a kind, he queried. You know what I mean, the scientist growled. Metaxas turned to Shawkat. How long until the rest of your rescue team arrives here? He asked. 20 minutes, Shawkat confirmed. An unhappy expression crossed the scientist's furry face. Why are you bringing a rescue team here? He asked. Because we need all of these claws and we need them now, Metaxas answered. And when the rescue team gets here, they'll need a crash course in how to fly them. When you say crash course, you don't mean that literally, do you? Asked the scientist. Metaxas was not in a mood to smile. You said that one Gen 1 unit is not flight ready, he asked. Right, the scientist said. It's in pieces at the moment. How long will it take you to put it back together? Metaxas asked. The scientist screwed up his face in mock concentration. A few hours, maybe, he answered. You've got 20 minutes, and counting, Metaxas replied sternly. The scientist sighed and muttered, I had a bad feeling you were going to say that. Maine watched as the scientist hobbled away, picked up a wall phone and started barking instructions at a technician to get down to the lab urgently to prepare the Gen 1 claw for flight. Everybody except the GXs was gathered around the Gen 2 units, discussing what would happen when the rest of the rescue team arrived. The same issue was at the forefront of Maine's mind. After exchanging a whispered word with his brother, the pair moved over and stood next to Shawkat. They were as large and as strong as the Yeti, but to achieve what they wanted they needed more than physical strength. They would need to make a convincing argument, something they were completely untrained to do. We want to come with you, stated Maine. His brother nodded in agreement. Shawkat glanced at him coldly. To Kathmandu, out of the question, he replied. Why? Maine asked. There are only 7 claws and every one of them will be used by a member of the rescue team, Shawkat said. He stared at the GX with penetrating blue eyes, and even if there were more claws, I don't trust you. You're both a liability because I don't know which side you're really on, ours or North Korea's. We're on your side, Maine said. Shawkat just shrugged. So you say, he replied. Mohawk cleared his throat. With his vertical silver grill of hair, he was taller than the Yeti by a few inches. We know we've made mistakes, he protested. We want to make things right. Bit late for that now, Shawkat retorted. No, it's not, Mohawk pressed. We're more used to you than another Yeti, Shawkat scoffed. I highly doubt that. It's true, Maine pressed. We can move around the airport without attracting attention. Shawkat looked pointedly at Mohawk's outrageous hairstyle. Well, without attracting too much attention anyway, Maine conceded. That means we can move around in all the public areas without being worried if people see us. At least people won't scream and run for the hills the way they will if they see a Yeti wandering around in the airport. A menacing growl issued from Shawkat's throat, and his tone was icy. You're on really thin ice now, friend, he growled. Maine hurriedly continued. We're just saying that we can provide you with valuable information that you won't be able to get if you take 2 yetis instead of us. That's why you need us. It sounds good in theory, Shawkat said, but how can I be sure you're not a decoy to slow us down while Flattop gets away? There was no easy answer to that one. The GXs were committed heart and soul to saving Abby and Shangri-La, but the only way they could prove it was if Shawkat let them come along. You can't be sure, Maine replied. You'll just have to trust us. Yeah, well, that's going to be a problem for me, Shawkat remarked. Laheeti and Twigger had been listening in silence to the tense exchange. The young prince thought back to when he met Mohawk, Maine, and Flattop on the muddy mountain road to Shabrubesi. It felt like a lifetime ago. Like everybody else, he had been totally shocked to learn that they were genetically engineered soldiers on a mission to steal a yeti tooth so that North Korea could create an army of super soldiers to take over the world. Who wouldn't be, but he also believed them when they said they had left that existence behind. I'll vouch for them, Laheeti suddenly said. I think they are telling the truth. If they were really working with Flattop, they would have escaped with him. Shawkat's gaze flicked down to the 14-year-old. His eyes were firm but not unfriendly. What would you know? He queried. You're just a kid. Laheeti, who was not much taller than the yeti's waist, squared up to the furry giant. I know that Mohawk and Maine pulled us out from under a landslide and saved our lives, he declared. If they really meant to harm us, they wouldn't have done that, Twig agreed. They saved us when nobody else could, he said. Shawkat stared down at the 14-year-olds for a long moment. Despite his belittling comment to Laheeti, he valued the teenager's opinions. He turned to Mohawk and Maine. Looks like you've got a couple of believers, he said. Good for you, the GXs nodded. But let's be frank, even serial killers have groupies, Shawkat muttered. The corners of Maine's mouth turned down. Now that's just being rude, he sighed. Shawkat snorted and folded his muscular arms across his chest. Anyway, the thing of it is that I trust what Laheeti and Twig say about you, he said. They've known you longer than anybody else here. I'd previously heard that you saved their lives by pulling a bus out from under a landslide. And it's true that we can use as much intel as we can get when we arrive at the airport. The Yeti sighed loudly. So I guess that settles it. You can come along. Maine extended a hand in friendship, the way he had seen Burnmaster do when greeting other people. Shawkat didn't move, leaving his own arms folded across his chest. Maine, seeing that his invitation was rebuffed, slowly lowered his hand. Shawkat fixed the GXs with an unblinking gaze. But let's get something straight, he said flatly. You're part of the team and I give the orders. You step out of line and I step on you. You do anything that makes me think that you're working for the other side and I step on you. Don't think I can't do it. Half gorilla or not, me and 6 other yetis on the rescue team will break you in half. Shawkat pointed at them both aggressively and growled. You got that? Mohawk and Maine smiled grimly. Got it, Maine replied. But for the record, there won't be 6 other yetis now, because we're going. No, there will be 6 others, Shawkat confirmed. 7 if you count Zaw. How? There are only 7 claws, Maine queried. You weren't listening to the scientist, were you? Shawkat said. Each claw can lift a maximum load of 300 kilograms. A yeti only weighs 150 kilos, so that means the claws can carry 2 yetis. Or 1 yeti and 1 human. You'll be passengers strapped to the claw pilot, like tandem skydiving in the human world. Laheeti listened to this information with interest. So that means there's space for more passengers, right? He asked. Shawkat looked down at the young prince with kindly eyes. I know exactly what you're thinking, kid, and you can forget it, he said. It's too dangerous. But we want to be there to help Isabelle, Laheeti exclaimed. Maybe, but this mission is going to put us right in the middle of some major action, Shawkat said. Not a good place for kids. Laheeti looked hurt. We got this far, didn't we? He said. You mean to Shangri-La? Asked Shawkat. In case you've forgotten, you were all carried here by a yeti rescue team. But before that, we made it up the mountain, Laheeti pressed. You had a guide, Shawkat said. But we still did it, persisted Laheeti. That shows we can handle ourselves in tough situations. No, it doesn't, Shawkat scoffed. All it shows is that you've got the minimum skills necessary to climb to altitudes where you can really get hurt. A good climber always knows when to turn around and go back. You underestimate us, grumped Laheeti, a dark expression on his face. You overestimate yourselves, Shawkat said. Besides, whatever's going to happen at the airport tonight ain't gonna be like climbing a mountain. Twigger gave it a shot. You need us, he declared, for intel in the airport. I've got the gorilla brothers for that, Shawkat said. They're not enough, argued Twig. Tribhuvan Airport's a big place. You'll need more eyes on the ground, moving around the public areas. You need us for that. When he says us, added Pemba, he means me as well. And me, stuttered Gulbenkian. Right, Twig said. In fact, we can go places that even Mohawk and Maine can't go. Kids never get in trouble for breaking the law. We can sneak around the airport, and if we get caught someplace we're not supposed to be, we can just pretend to be lost and talk our way out of trouble. That's right, said Laheeti, we're perfect spies. Despite his better judgment, Shawkat was giving the proposition serious consideration. When the shooting starts, you'd all have to keep your heads down and stay out of the way, he grunted. The teenagers all nodded their heads vigorously. Absolutely, they exclaimed. Shawkat was shaking his head. I can't believe I am agreeing to this, but all right, you can come along, he declared. But what I said to the GXs applies to you as well. You follow my orders at all times, agreed. Laheeti responded on everyone's behalf. Yes, he said, but does the bit about you breaking the GXs in half if they step out of line also apply to us? There was no hint of a smile on Shawkat's face. Of course, he growled. What made you think otherwise? Stammered Laheeti with a gulp. No reason, just wondering. Burnmaster came over on his crutches. His left leg was still in a plaster cast. You might have convinced Shawkat to take you along, but you haven't convinced me to let you go, he said. We don't need to, Twig declared confidently. Maybe Shawkat will break you in half if you don't let us go. Shawkat laughed and said, It doesn't work like that, kid. Damn, muttered Twig. You know that I can't come because of my leg, said Burnmaster. But even so, you're both still my responsibility while we're here in Nepal. So is Isabelle, Laheeti said. Burnmaster grimaced. Don't remind me, he replied. We really can help, urged Laheeti, and Gull will keep an eye on us. Then promise me you'll stay out of trouble and leave the fighting to the yetis. Before Burnmaster could finish, Twig and Laheeti gave him their word. He smiled, then added, And do everything you can to bring Isabelle back. The two boys nodded enthusiastically and said, We will. A few minutes later, everybody was ushered out of the lab and taken to a sparsely furnished room. There they waited. After a while, some human clothes were brought to them to replace their togas. This was important because they couldn't blend into the crowd at the airport if they were dressed for Shangri-La. Putting on his usual clothes made Laheeti suddenly understand that this was real. They were leaving Shangri-La. He hadn't pictured it in his mind this way. Twigger figured the rescue team must have arrived by now. I wonder why we're not allowed to watch them get their intensive claw pilot training, he mused. Because they don't want us to see how bad they are at flying, suggested Pemba. It would just worry us. Now that you've said that, replied Burnmaster, I'm worried already. Eventually, Shawkat turned up and spoke about the mission in detail, explaining each person's role and what was expected of them. When he finished, he asked if anybody had any questions. There were none. All right, he said, let's go and meet the team. When they re-entered the huge laboratory, a handful of Yeti technicians were hurriedly performing last-minute checks on 7 cloths arranged around the central columns. A group of 6 Yetis stood nearby, wearing loose-fitting midnight black togas with voluminous hoods. Their white furry faces with the distinctive swirling black markings were visible, as were their clawed hands and bare feet. Their attention was focused on preparing their weapons for the coming mission. Laheeti watched as they loaded, checked, and strapped a variety of small and large guns to their bodies. Altogether, they were carrying enough firepower to take out a small army. If the North Koreans did the same, the airport would probably be razed to the ground in the coming battle. Laheeti felt both thrilled and scared at the same time. Bristling with weapons, the Yetis looked young, fit, and mean. As a rescue team, their job was to save lives, but here they were required to do the opposite. These guys were Black Ops soldiers, Yeti style. For Isabelle's sake, Laheeti hoped they were as tough as they looked. Shawkat kept the introductions to a minimum. Each person was paired up with a member of the rescue team and newly anointed claw pilot. Everybody shook hands. Twigger watched his own small hand disappear in the baseball glove-sized palm of the Yeti he had been teamed up with. Gulbenkian stuttered out a friendly hello, and his Yeti grunted in reply. Mohawk and Maine got a frosty reception. As the introductions were concluding, Metaxas walked over to the group with a somber expression on his face. I just received some instructions that you're not going to like, he grunted. He waited until he had their attention. The council has decided that you can't take any guns on this mission, no projectile weapons of any kind. Several of the yetis exchanged loaded glances. Vander rested his long barrel rifle casually on his shoulder. Is he kidding? He muttered. Simbara, a heavyset yeti with a jaw like a front-end loader, spoke up. Oh, I get it, he growled. The North Koreans aren't gonna bring their guns, and you want to make sure this is a fair fight. Metaxas accepted their animosity with a bowed head. I didn't agree with the council's decision, but I was overruled, he explained. I know this makes your rescue mission a lot harder. Without guns, it's gonna be a one-way trip for all of us, muttered Vander. It might not be as bad as it sounds, Simbara suggested. He fixed Metaxas with a deadpan stare. My karma's fully paid up, so I'm sure their guns will jam every time they have me in their sights. Zana, the only female in the group, asked. Why no guns? The council is concerned that the airport is going to turn into a bloodbath, and that innocent humans are going to get caught in the crossfire, Metaxas explained. If the council wants to prevent a bloodbath, replied Zana, surely the smart thing to do is let us take guns, so we can shoot the North Koreans before they shoot anybody else. Disarming us is just going to make matters worse. Her comment brought nods of approval from other members of the team. So what are we supposed to do? Asked Grint. Shine torches under our faces and try to scare him to death. You'll have to rely on your hand-to-hand combat skills and the fast-acting sedative you use on rescue missions, Metaxas said, and you'll have the element of surprise. Oh, they'll be surprised all right, muttered Hassan, that we came to the showdown empty-handed. There was an uncomfortably long silence until Shawkat clapped his hands together. Well, we may not like it, but we're gonna have to deal with it, he stated. You heard the senator. Unload all of your weapons and leave them here. At least we'll be flying lighter and faster in the claws. As the rescue team packed away their weapons, the lab technicians helped the passengers put on the harnesses that would allow them to be buckled onto their respective claw pilots. Each harness was a complicated series of heavy-duty straps that went over the shoulders, around the waist and down under the groin for good measure. When properly fitted, it was tight enough to push the breath out of Twigger's body. In a strained voice about 1 octave higher than usual, he asked for his harness to be loosened off a bit, particularly the lower strap. The technician obliged, and when Twig could breathe again, he gave the technician 2 thumbs up. When all of the passengers were securely in their harnesses, it was time to link up with their Yeti team members. The Yetis who had been paired up with the smaller passengers, like Za and the 14-year-olds, were pleased with the way that worked out. But that meant there were several unlucky Yetis who had drawn the short claw, so to speak, and ended up with passengers who were almost as big and heavy as they were. That would make flying the claw more difficult and dangerous than it already was. Vander looked Mohawk up and down contemptuously, and then bolted the GX's harness onto the chest plate of his own harness that he was wearing over the top of his black toga. They were now locked together in a tandem position, with the GX's back firmly pressed against the Yeti's chest. In theory, a perfect flying position for a claw pilot and passenger, except in this case Mohawk's silver crest of hair was directly in front of Vander's face. Every time Mohawk turned his head from side to side, his hair completely blocked Vander's field of view and, worse still, tickled the tip of his nose. The Yeti swore. I can't see a damn thing with this wall of silver hair in front of my face, he snorted. Can't you cut it off? Mohawk shook his head, further aggravating the Yeti. Don't you think cutting off your face is a bit of an extreme solution? He retorted. You're not that ugly and it won't help you to see any better. I don't mean to cut my face off, you nitwit, Vander swore. I mean, can't you cut your hair off? The problem is that you are too short, Mohawk snapped. No, the problem is that I have to fly with you, Vander shot back. In truth, the problem was that Mohawk had to fly at all. Because of his fear of heights, he couldn't imagine anything worse than dangling thousands of meters above the ground in one of the experimental flying machines. The mere thought of it made him feel sick to his stomach. His only consolation was that all of the non-citizens were required to wear blindfolds to prevent them learning the location of Shangri-La during the flight out of the Himalayas. He was no exception. It meant he wouldn't be able to see anything, which was fine by him. The ground might be miles away, but he could pretend it was only a few inches beneath his feet. With that in mind and some deep breathing, he would probably be able to keep his wits together for the journey. A few meters away were Grint and Twig, already bolted together in the tandem position and ready for Grint to hook himself into a claw. Twigger liked Grint from the moment he met him. The Yeti had a quick smile and a relaxed personality. With the pattern of black spots on his face, he looked a bit like a leopard. They had only known each other for a few minutes, but Twig plucked up enough courage to ask the most pressing question on his mind. "So how did your flight training go?" Twig asked. Grint chuckled and replied. "Could have gone better." Twig's heart skipped a beat. He tried to keep his voice casual. "Why, what happened?" he asked. "I almost crashed twice," Grint said. "But you didn't crash," Twig said optimistically. "Right," Grint stated. "So it could have gone worse," Twig said. Grint gave the teenager's hair a friendly tussle. "I like your attitude, kid," he laughed. Laheeti had been paired up with Zana. She was slim, strong, shapely, and a member of another species. When the young prince was strapped against her chest in the tandem position, his feet dangled high off the ground, and his head rested against the smooth black toga covering her breasts. This certainly rated as the strangest thing he had ever done in his young life. He wasn't sure how to break the ice. "I heard that Isabelle is your friend," Zana said eventually. "Yes, one of my best friends," Laheeti replied. Zana nodded. "Don't worry, we'll get her back," she said. Laheeti hoped so. "Your normal job is in a rescue team, right?" he queried. "Like the one that rescued us from the crevasse," Zana nodded and said, "Yes, we're one of the best." "Maine said that there's going to be a plane load of North Korean soldiers at the airport," Laheeti continued. "Are you as good at fighting as you are at rescuing?" Zana's response was rock solid. "Better," she stated. A few steps away, Gulbenkian, the royal bodyguard, was keeping an eye on his young charge at the same time as he was getting strapped to the chest of Simbara, one of the larger yetis. "You're almost as big as the two silver-haired humans," the yeti grunted. "But I hear they're so big because they're half gorilla. Does the same apply to you?" "No," stuttered Gull, "I'm 100% human." "So how did you get so big?" asked Simbara with a frown. "I come from a little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean," Gull explained. Simbara shrugged, causing Gull to get jolted up and down. "So?" he asked. "Well, there's not much to do there," explained Gull, "except eat." Simbara laughed. Next to Simbara and Gull were Zaw and Sierra, the lucky recipients of one of the Gen 2 claws. Sierra privately believed that Shawkat had made a mistake by allowing the teenage yeti to come along. He understood that Abby was Zaw's sister, but in Sierra's estimation the mission stood a better chance of success if Zaw was replaced with a fully trained, and fully grown, yeti. Another potential problem was that Zaw's emotional involvement may cause him to behave recklessly at a time when the team needed cool heads to prevail. "So how'd you manage to get yourself included in this mission?" Sierra asked casually. "I didn't," Zaw replied with a shrug. "Shawkat just told me that there was a place for me if I wanted it." Sierra nodded woodenly. "It's nice to have you along," he said. "You can babysit the human teenagers that are coming." Zaw frowned. "I was hoping to get more involved than that," he said. "Remember, it's my sister who's been kidnapped." "Sure, just don't do anything stupid," Sierra said. Zaw's self-congratulatory mood wore off real quick. "You mean like strap myself into an experimental flying machine with a rookie pilot who has almost no flying experience whatsoever?" he retorted. "You mean that kind of stupid?" Sierra chuckled. The kid was young, but he had some fire in him. "Point taken," he conceded. Pemba was not as fortunate as Zaw because he had been allocated one of the Gen 1 units which he distinctly recalled the scientist explaining were not as safe as the Gen 2s. Shangri-La was located in a very high mountain and the ground was a long, long way down if one or both of the rotors suddenly stopped spinning. And that was always assuming Hassan, his newly trained claw pilot, didn't accidentally fly them both into a mountainside first. Hassan strapped Pemba to his chest and adjusted the balance. The human teenager let himself be shifted around like a doll until the yeti was satisfied that the weight distribution was comfortable. Once the claw was in the air, there would be no chances to stop and rearrange things. "How'd your flying training go?" Pemba asked carefully. "Not too bad," Hassan replied. "Don't worry, I'll get us to the airport in one piece." They were the right words, but they lacked a comforting ring. "Do you like flying?" Pemba asked. "Not really," replied Hassan. "It makes me nervous when there's a few thousand meters of air under me and nothing to hold on to." "So I take it you're not too keen on these claws," Pemba mused. "If God intended for humans to fly, he would have given them wings," Hassan said. "The same applies to yetis." Pemba couldn't fault that logic. "Amen to that," he muttered. Some of the teams were firing up their claws as Shawkat finished strapping himself and Maine into their Gen 1 unit. Like all of the non-citizens, Maine was now wearing a blindfold to prevent him from observing the location of Shangri-La. Beads of sweat were already forming along his forehead. He had neglected to mention to Shawkat that he was petrified of the dark. Even the darkness caused by wearing a blindfold gave him the jitters. He would be permitted to remove it once they were well away from the mountains. Until then, he would just have to deal with his fear. Over the roar of the rotors, Shawkat yelled, "I've taken a big chance with you too. Don't let me down." A huge panel in the domed ceiling high above slid aside, revealing a brightly lit tunnel leading to the surface. The cloths lifted off, one at a time, hovered briefly, then accelerated straight up and disappeared into the opening. Metaxas watched them go with growing apprehension. They were a small, unarmed team against a well-equipped North Korean assault force. Even with the element of surprise, the odds were stacked against them, but there was no scope for failure. The future of Shangri-La depended on their success, and so did his daughter's life.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.